put it on there. I mean, if I'm going to make blanket statements like that, I better back them up with some hard reasoning, right? This is going to be worse than Egoraptor's Zelda sequelitis. I mean, there's bashing something that the internet loves, and then there's this. You don't touch this. You don't. This is Half-Life 2. This is the quintessential landmark for every FPS shooter made since 2004. This is it. The blueprint. The benchmark. It has been lauded as the best game of the 2000s and catapulted Gabe Newell into the history books. This is what every developer has copied since then, and every single game that came close can't even break the barrier of quality and depth when it comes to gameplay, storytelling, and immersion, and it's just not very good. Let me give you a little background on where I'm coming from. So back in 1992, I was 4 years old, and my folks had just gotten a personal computer. It was their first one that they had ever got, and I was able to play a whole bunch of PC games on it. In 1994, my cousin Chris introduced me to this game called Doom 2. And that was a lot of fun. I really liked the mechanics of it. I liked being able to run around, gun down a whole bunch of enemies. It wasn't terribly realistic, but it was fun. In 1996, my cousin got me a Nintendo Entertainment System, and a year later, I would then get an N64. After about 12 years of being a Nintendo kid, I finally got a real gaming quality PC in 2008. Now, the first couple of games I played were fairly standard at the time. It was Fallout 3 and World of Warcraft. A year later, my roommate introduced me to this software called Steam, where you could get a whole bunch of video games for a really cheap price, and you could download them directly off of the internet. So after spending about $100 on Steam sales, I ended up with two games that I had heard were really fun first-person shooters, Half-Life 1 and Half-Life 2. When I first played Half-Life 1, I didn't quite get it. The pacing was really strange to me. You spend a good half an hour on a train not doing anything. You're just looking at scenery. The thing was, I started to understand the time period in which this game came out. This was actually revolutionary. You spent a half an hour just conversing with random people, not actually doing any shooting. It allowed you to get some really good pacing into the story of the game. So when shit finally hit the fan, it felt really impactful because you had gotten to know the environment and the people who you're walking around with. I could really understand how the game had evolved from Doom, a game I had played a lot about 10 years earlier. I could see how this was the next step. It felt more real for a first-person shooter. It felt like it could really carry a narrative, but it also felt like it could be just a run-and-gun, have-fun kind of shooter as well. It was sort of the best of both worlds. So after really getting invested in Half-Life 1, I was ready to play Half-Life 2. I had heard all the hype about this game. It had gotten tons of Game of the Year awards. People would say that it's just one of the greatest first-person shooters ever made, and I sat down and I played it, and I didn't see it. This is the first-person shooter that everyone has said is one of the greatest ever. This is the shooter that people just love and love to gush about. 'Cause it's got problems. It's got serious problems in both the narrative and the gameplay. Problem number one, the story. First of all, how did Gordon Freeman become so well known for surviving the Black Mesa incident? From what I understand, it was all a government operation. They tried to sweep the whole thing under the rug, and really only G-Man is the one who knows about it. Not only that, when he enters City 17, the whole thing is controlled by the Combine, and they're kind of doing a 1984 thing where they're suppressing the information to the public. Why do people know Gordon so well? What, like, did someone have a PR campaign for him? Yes, I did steal that joke from Zero Punctuation. Shut up. Second of all, how did so many people survive the Black Mesa incident? It was my knowledge that Gordon was the only one to make it out alive. The last few scientists sent him to Zen, he fought all the aliens all by himself, and then G-Man plucked him out to hold him in some sort of a, interstellar portal thing? I don't know. We never really find out much about G-Man in the first place. The only reason Gordon made it out alive was because of the nanosuit. The fact that every single member of the resistance movement and the leader of City 17 worked with Gordon in Black Mesa is just a little suspect. Unless, the developers shoehorned two completely unrelated games together with a story that was barely there but really good in the first one and kind of overdone in the second one. You see, Freeman's character is what helped give give the first game so much weight. Gordon was an everyman in the first game. It made him very relatable. He was fragile. So you could insert yourself into Gordon Freeman and pretend that you're the one facing off against the horde of aliens and Marines. In a way, sort of like John McClane in the first Die Hard. He was an everyman. In the second game, Gordon Freeman is much more like John McClane in Die Hard 4 and 5, basically putting God mode on and mowing through Doom 2, like I used to do when I was 6. Okay, I wanted to be able to beat the game, alright? I wanted to be able to mow down monsters and not be afraid of dying. Freeman in the second game is treated like the second coming of Christ, and everyone just automatically expects for him to come in and save the day. Granted, that is what G-Man told him at the beginning, but why does everyone else know that? Did G-Man communicate this with other people? Because no, he didn't. Now, he should have found out more about this in episode 1 and 2, but I'll get to that later. The big problem I have with it is this. What makes Gordon Freeman such a good candidate for saving people? In the first game, all you're trying to do is survive. At the beginning, a bunch of scientists are saying, Gordon, you gotta go up there and tell people what's going on because they gotta help us. But even by the end of the game, all they want you to do is escape and tell people what happened. Even they realize we're kind of done for at this point. That doesn't make Gordon Freeman a good candidate to come in and save people from some random alien race. Just because he did it the first time doesn't mean he can do it every time. And he wasn't even all that good at it the first time. Hell, we did a live cast of that game recently, and halfway through the game, I died 22 times. Like, it would take a lot of effort to have to get through that, and you're just trying to save yourself. Not everyone else. Everyone else just wants you to tell everyone what happened. Another problem I have with Freeman as a character is that he's still a silent protagonist. Now, that worked really well in the first game, as he didn't have to say anything. People just fed information to him, and he moved on from location to location. But the fact that the second game has lengthy cutscenes, where you can run around, which is kind of nice, but that's beside the point, it makes Gordon feel so freaking weird and alien. Why doesn't he talk? Why can't he converse with these people? The silent protagonist archetype doesn't seem to fit the rest of the game. When you have so many interesting characters like Alex and Eli, and characterizing them as part of the story, it doesn't work to have a silent protagonist that says nothing beyond be the driving force for the player character. Half-Life 2 needed a character that could talk and react to a lot of the situations happening to them. Otherwise, it feels like all these characters are simply feeding exposition to him, and it's completely out of place from all the other situations where you're, once again, just trying to survive. Despite the fact that these people have told you numerous times, hey, you're here to save us. No, I'm not. Half-Life 1 didn't need that kind of a protagonist because the gameplay and the story had a disconnect that gave the player character some freedom. But the problem is Half-Life 2 doesn't give us that freedom. We have to be involved in the story. We have to be involved in all these people's lives. And it makes us sit through long exposition between other characters with absolutely no input on our part. This is why having a stoic main character who doesn't talk didn't work in Dead Space. They changed that in Dead Space 2 because they realized, oh wait, we can't characterize this person every time they sit through a long sequence of exposition. They have to just sit back and be like, okay, no, I agree, yeah. And it doesn't work. It didn't work in Half-Life 2, it doesn't work in Dead Space, it just doesn't work. This made me think that maybe the second game could have had a different protagonist. What if G-Man is capturing a lot of different people from time and space, and Gordon is just one of them? Why couldn't Game 2 end with G-Man appearing and capturing random Johnny number 2, and keeping him and Gordon in the same dimensional rift? Wouldn't that be a nice bit of continuity with the first game? Speaking of which, let's talk about the ending. It's terrible. So you get to the top of the tower and you're here to shut down the big rift thing, and you shoot a bunch of lasers at some panels, at which point Alex then says, alright, we gotta get out of here before it explodes. Before she can even end her sentence, it explodes. And the whole thing freezes. G-Man comes out of nowhere and tells you, hey, congratulations, Gordon, you did the job that I asked you to do. Now I'm going to send you back into that dimensional rift, and don't worry about all the other people, their lives don't matter. We'll see you later, and the game ends. This is called Deus Ex Machina. God comes out, tells you did it, and puts you back in the toy box he pulled you out of from the beginning of the game. It is executed horribly. because it gives no impact to any of the other characters that we've set up this entire time, and it gives no impact to the main character either. If at any point anything goes wrong, G-Man could just pull you out and be like, okay, try again, poof. There's no weight to it. You need to have an ending that has weight, otherwise it's just stupid. So if that was the ending by itself, it's bad. Let's just put it at that. But if they knew they were going to make more expansions afterward, it's worse, and I'll tell you why. During the second half of the 2000s, a lot of developers started getting into taking out segments of video games and releasing them as DLC. So developers started realizing, hey, we could just cut out the ending to our game and sell it for a $9.99 DLC. Valve did it first. Yeah, if episode 1 and 2 were supposed to be the actual ending to the game, then they're doing what every other developer did. The problem is that people get mad at other developers for taking out segments of the game and selling them as extras for later, so why didn't we get mad at Valve for doing that? If they knew that Half-Life 2 was going to be the actual end of the game, then it was just a terrible ending. But if they knew they were going to add more segments later, then we should be mad at them for thinking, hey, we're just going to cut out segments of the game and sell it to you later. Why were they allowed to get away with it, but so many other developers weren't? And now we've come to the biggest problem that everyone has complained about since 2007. Where the hell is episode 3? I know it's a cliche at this point, but it's a legitimate question. Seriously, where the hell is it? It's been 8 years. I found out that the original storyline was supposed to be 5 episodes long, and then they realized that it was taking too long, so they were going to scrunch down episodes 3, 4, and 5 into one episode. And it's been 8 years and we know no information about it. None. We don't know what's going to happen next. We don't know what the hell happened to it. Could it be that Valve didn't want to develop video games anymore? Oh, look, it's a video we made a year and a half ago, calling it. Valve had 2 really interesting follow-up expansions to the first Half-Life game that showed a completely different perspective of the Black Mesa incident. One was from the perspective of a security guard, the other was from the perspective of a military guy. Now, despite the fact that Valve has called these non-canonical since then, I still think they're worth a play. I think it's fascinating to be able to see the whole Black Mesa incident from a completely different perspective, and honestly, I kind of wish they would have done that with the follow-up games to Half-Life 2. Those would have allowed us to flesh out the ending to the story and maybe find out about the fates of Alex and Gordon without having a, retcon of Alex and Gordon being saved by the alien race that they've been murdering throughout the entire game. Why did they save them again? Actually, I take that back. They didn't kill the aliens in Half-Life 2. They helped the aliens in Half-Life 2. It's just that Gordon murdered tons and tons of those aliens in Half-Life 1. And apparently they're just okay with this because those guys were assholes or something. Problem number 2. The gameplay. Okay, so the guns work well. The crowbar never feels like it's actually hitting anything, but that's kind of a really minor nitpick. The action sequences are fun, despite the fact that frequent deaths are still a thing. So if all that's good, what are my problems with it? Well, my problems are with the pacing and the way that it is structured. While Half-Life 1 was an innovation in how first-person shooters were made, I feel like Half-Life 2 is trying to be an innovation in the way first-person shooters were made. And because of that, it falls short and feels really dated at this point. Now, the game begins with a fun walkthrough in a 1984-esque town under constant surveillance. Then we're chased through some impressive set pieces before we're introduced to the resistance movement in a cutscene where we say nothing but are given a shit ton of exposition. Now, one thing I noticed leading up to that cutscene was that while I was walking around exploring the place, I really liked the design of the game. I thought it looked really good. Towards the end of the scene, I then start getting chased by a whole bunch of guards, but I have no means to protect myself, so I think, okay, I just gotta run. And it was a fun sequence, but I remember thinking, the scenery around here looks really nice. I'd love to take a moment and, look at it and appreciate it, but I can't because I'm being chased by a bunch of bad guys right now. It almost felt like Valve was trying to hide its own engine from me. Valve, let me look at your engine. It looks good. The next few chapters feel like a proper follow-up. We go through a sewer level, fight some monsters, a vehicle section that would be more fun if we didn't have to stop every minute to either explore a new location or unlock the next section with another silly physics puzzle. At the end of it, we go through another huge amount of exposition before we're introduced to the first real jarring change in tone, Ravenholm. Ravenholm is amazing. This is one of the best chapters in the game, and it is so freaking cool. and it's over way too quickly. The problem was the game up until this point wasn't a survival horror game, but now we're in this like little survival horror town. I mean, I like genres of that type, and it was a really cool town to go through, but if you're gonna make us go through a completely different genre, at least make it be a continuing part of the game. I want more stuff like this, not a 20-minute segment followed by another stupid vehicle section that is completely arbitrary because we have to stop every minute to unlock the next area. Why are you doing this? The problem is the Source engine is not like the CryEngine. It can't handle really, really big set pieces, which is why these vehicle sections feel so out of place, and I think it's also why we have to stop every minute or so to unlock a new section. If we were to just blast right through these areas, they'd be over in a minute, and we'd hit another loading screen and then another loading screen before continuing the next part of the game. The stealth sequence with the antlions also feels very out of place. It's almost like Valve wanted to throw every single genre they could at the wall and see what stuck. Never mind the fact that they have a fantastic formula here for a really fun FPS, but they also want to add 2 different RTS sections, a driving section, a horror section, a stealth section. Make up your mind, please! This and the second vehicle section makes me realize how quickly thrown together Half-Life 2 feels. It's not a well-planned game, it's a series of levels that are connected loosely, made to show off how good the Source engine is. This is why Portal had a better story, Left 4 Dead had better gameplay and structure, Half-Life 1 was a better game. Of course, Left 4 Dead is a series of set pieces loosely thrown together, but it was built that way. Half-Life 2 should be one complete story, not just the car level, the dam level, the stealth level, the haunted town level. This also may have to do with the fact that Half-Life 2 was nearly completed in 2003 when a hacker leaked the entire game onto the internet. Gabe Newell then scrapped the entire project and remade it as a completely different Half-Life 2. Supposedly, the original one was supposed to be a lot darker, and honestly, I kinda wish we would have had the original one. Also, as an aside, having to stop everything we're doing and do that annoying physics teeter-totter game is really annoying. The gravity gun is cool, but it feels so arbitrary. Why is there a gravity gun and physics in the game? Because it was cool looking at the time. Once again, it feels like this game is held together with just bits of, look what we can do with our engine, look how cool it is! Valve, are you feeling inadequate because your first game was made on an engine that wasn't actually yours? Half-Life 1 was made on an engine called Gold Source, which is heavily modified from John Romero and John Carmack's Quake engine. I know you guys wanted to make more games in the future, they didn't after 2007, see our previous video, but did you have to make Half-Life 2 basically the look what we can do with our engine game? Couldn't you have used that for any other game and then made a really good story based off of Half-Life 1? This is ultimately what makes Half-Life 2 feel old rather than just being old. Half-Life 1 is an old game, you can see that just by looking at it, but it never feels old. The gameplay flow and pacing is constant. We get exciting action, then you get to wander around looking for things. Even the on-the-rails part doesn't feel old. Because Half-Life 2 has to break up interesting gameplay to show off awesome things it can do with its engine, it makes it feel very outdated. Every game comes with a physics engine nowadays. Not every game can tell a really interesting story and also have really fun gameplay at the same time. Ultimately, I think this is what makes Half-Life 1 better than Half-Life 2. It was just structured better. Now, it may seem like I'm being overly harsh towards Half-Life 2. I am. But the fact of the matter is the game gets so much universal praise, I feel like someone has to step out and go, hey, it's got some problems. I'll take back what I put on the review Roulette. Half-Life 2 doesn't suck. It's just okay. It's very run-of-the-mill. And hopefully you guys understand where I'm coming from. We'll see you next time on Review Roulette. Next time on Review Roulette, Dan will be doing one of these topics. Let's find out which one. Which is why Naughty Dog sucks. Have fun. makes Gordon Freeman such a good candidate for saving people?
You know, for butt stuff.
Get out of here. You're not on until next week. It's a black guy.